All right, beautiful October day down here outside the bookstore, Drury Lane Books in Grand Marais. I'm with David Hakensen, a Minnesota author, and we're going to talk about the Gunflint Trail today and your book about Helen Hoover. And you're in Grand Marais for an event today through Chickawauk and some of the other historical societies here in the county and the North Shore area. David, good to be with you today.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks.
Absolutely. So let's first talk about your book. I mean, that's what you're here for.
Right.
That's what brought us together today. And Helen Hoover, maybe some of our listeners don't know who she is. Tell us about who she was and just a brief summary of her life.
Certainly. Helen Hoover was a nature writer who lived on Gunflint Lake in the 50s and 60s and early 70s. She wrote 4 books for the adult market. She wrote 3 books for kids. She had come up here in 1948 with her husband to buy a cabin, and after 6 years of coming up in summer vacations, they decided to walk away from their jobs and move up here permanently.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and these books are essentially what made her a very well-known, prominent figure, and you decided to write about her for what reason? What drew you to her story?
Well, I had read one of her books, and then I got hooked on her writing and found her other books. And as I'm interested often in doing, as I was hoping to find a biography of her, I had just read Sigurd Olsson's biography that David Backus had written because I had read a lot of Sig's books, and I found it fascinating not only about Sig but just about his process. So I figured somebody had written it, and there wasn't anything out there, but I learned that her papers were at UMD, and I sort of dug into those and sort of got the bug to write a biography.
Yeah, okay, great. And it's called Her Place in the Woods. We'll have some links here for people to be able to find it through Drury Lane, is where we like to direct people to order books. And also for more about Helen and just the backstory and everything of your experience writing the book and learning this, we've got a link here as well about a presentation you gave at Chickawauk Museum at the end of the Gunflint Trail. So it's a wonderful presentation. It's very well attended too, from what Bonnie and Mark tell me.
Yes, like 61 people were there that afternoon.
Yeah.
I was surprised, but I guess not surprised. There's still a lot of interest in Hoover up here. People have heard of her, they've read her books, and they don't know her backstory.
Yeah, and here's something that maybe is a bit of a romanticized notion that a lot of people who listen to the podcast probably have about the Gunflint Trail, and that's that it remains this rugged place. The people who live on the Gunflint are, hardcore. They endure these winters in these tough conditions, and they're living off the land, and they hunt and fish, and it's this sort of very hardcore lifestyle. The reality of the Gunflint right now in October 2025 is that most of the properties, the cabins up there, are seasonal residents. They have all the amenities. They have high-speed internet, very fast internet of most of the properties and cabins there, and are living in very much a comfortable way up there. And not all of them hunt or fish by any stretch of the imagination, or if they do, it's quite casual. And the Hoovers didn't hunt or fish. I mean, they definitely embodied a little more of a hardcore lifestyle than most of the people that live up the Gunflint now, in the sense they didn't have electricity and didn't want it, but they didn't hunt or fish, which is interesting.
They didn't hunt or fish, and they didn't accept, deer meat or fish from other people as well. They were odd in that sense that they moved here from Chicago. They both were professionals. They didn't have kids. They were 44 years old when they moved up here, and you would have thought that they would have been amenable to eating, deer meat and other wild game and fish. But Helen was morally opposed to hunting, so she wasn't interested in that at all. They ordered their groceries from town because they didn't have a car after a car accident early their first few months. So they ordered their groceries in the fall for the whole winter in town, or through wholesalers that they contracted with through the resorts, and would put in 6 months worth of groceries to have shipped to the cabin, and then find places in this small cabin and a second cabin they owned to just sort of store it all over the winter so it wouldn't freeze.
Yeah, right. And so the idea that they didn't hunt and fish, I mean, it sounds quite intentional, not just because they didn't have the equipment or the gear, they just didn't want to do that.
That's correct. They did not want to do it. Like I said, Helen was morally opposed to hunting. And that, when you consider all the resort owners and people who lived off the grid and even on the grid on the Gunflint Trail in the 40s and 50s, they were mostly people that would hunt and fish because that was sustenance, that was food they had to put on the table.
Right. Yeah, and so that is why at that time they are definitely an anomaly, and now I think that they would much more fit in sort of with the people who live on the trail now, who are wonderful people. I mean, I love the trail, and I've been associated with the trail up there, the community, for many years, and there are wonderful, wonderful people. But it's not what I would describe as a hardcore, rugged environment anymore, and it was, though, back then, which is why it's all the more unique that they didn't do those things.
Yeah, well, when you think about it, the resorts pushed real hard to get electric up the trail starting in the 50s. And if you look at old Cook County News Herald newspapers, there's these full-page ads for the REA, wanting people to sign up so they could run the electricity up there. The Hoovers, when they bought their cabin, it did not have running water, and it had an electric plant that did not work very well, and more often than not, it didn't. So they didn't have electricity, and when it came down the road, the REA was asking them to, bring it in, and Helen said, well, I don't think so if you're going to have to cut 200 feet wide corridor for the power line to come to our cabin. We'll choose the trees over power. Mm-hmm. So the whole time that they lived up here, they didn't have power, and that was 17 years.
Yeah, nice. So what's your connection or, understanding of trail life, or do you get up the Gunflint and spend time in the Boundary Waters and this whole area up here?
I come to Grand Marais and go up to the Gunflint, and fortunately I've met many people while writing this book that are resort owners, former resort owners, and some of the people that owned the Hoover cabins. I've gotten to know them well, and it's beautiful. I mean, it's just, but to your point, it is a more modern lifestyle now. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a lot of power. They have internet finally, and working internet, I should say. So you're right. I think the Hoovers would probably have been a better fit today than then. And the other thing being is that they're both professionals. Helen didn't have a college degree, but she had a very high IQ. So I think she would have been able to find more like-minded people up here now than she found back then, because I think both of them, being professionals from Chicago, were a bit of a curiosity among the residents up here.
Right, and now, I mean, there's a local claim to fame of we've got more PhDs living in Cook County per capita than any other place in Minnesota, or even beyond, is something that a lot of people will proudly state. And so, do you get out? You mentioned Sig Olson too. Do much paddling, or
I don't do any paddling, which is interesting. You'd say, why is a guy writing a book about a nature ride? But Helen didn't paddle. They didn't do a canoe. They had a boat that they used occasionally, and went across to the Canadian side to have picnics when you could do that and not worry about the border patrol. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not a paddler, but I enjoy the outdoors. I have a lake place in central Minnesota that I go to. I came from there today, and so I enjoy the woods and being out. And it is interesting. I mean, the one thing I think Helen taught us that I think is something we can all learn and is timeless is that it's amazing if you unplug, take the phone away, and just sit outside and just enjoy nature. Listen to the birds, look at the clouds, feel the wind. I've been doing that the past couple of days because I've been there by myself, and it's just a whole different dimension to appreciating nature.
Nice. And so, as you've met these people up the Gunflint and Cook County people, what's been your impression of trail life and these people who sound like they were quite welcoming and offering to you of information and space and so forth?
Well, it's a real tight-knit community up there, and particularly so when it gets to be difficult in the winter. I mean, winter is still winter regardless of whether you have modern conveniences. You still have to deal with, plowing and ice and the roads and all of that. But it's a very tight-knit community, and I kind of felt that when I was at Chickawauk. The people up there all know each other. Many of them have been coming up here for many years. The thing that I found with several folks some of them knew the Hoovers or knew of them and overlapped by a few years with them. Some of the former resort owners, like Charlene Letourneau from Heston's, her son and daughter-in-law own it and run it now, but Charlene ran it after her mother, Peg, did, and Peg is the one that was really close to Helen. But Charlene knew her as a youngster. So it's nice to actually meet people who actually knew or had some memories of the Hoovers.
Right. Did you get to meet Bruce Kerfoot before he passed away?
I talked to him briefly at a trade show about 15 years ago, but we didn't connect after that, so I didn't really get much on of his opinion about Helen.
What was Justine and Helen's crossover connections or interactions?
Well, it's interesting. I don't think Helen was a big fan of Justine's hunting, because a lot of the deer that the Hoovers fed in their yard and that were eventually shot by hunters. There was a piece of correspondence I read where Helen had talked to another friend and said, I talked to one of my neighbor resort owners, and she thanked me for fattening up the deer. So the only woman resort owner up there that was hunting had to be Justine Kerfoot. So, but they actually worked together on a couple of things. There was an effort back in the late 50s by surprisingly, the Grand Marais Chamber of Commerce and the business interest here to try to do another Canadian entry on the east end of Gunflint Lake.
Yeah.
And it was quite controversial because the resort owners up there didn't want it, but the Grand Marais business people did, and for some reason they thought that would prevent them from driving on to Grand Portage and crossing and somehow go up the Gunflint Trail. So I guess the logic was that they'd spend more time in Grand Marais rather than pass through, but just the same, it was sort of a crazy idea given that nobody on the trail was really interested in it. And Justine and Helen worked together on things. Justine sort of was the unofficial leader of the resort owners, and they opposed it and got a petition going. Helen was a prolific letter writer. She'd write letters to the Cook County newspaper, but also to the state conservation department and others complaining about the folly of this idea. And she was keeping Sigurd Olson involved at the same time because he had heard about it, and they knew each other as writers, not real well because they lived so far apart, but they she was keeping Sig in the loop on what was going on because he wanted to know. And at that time, I think he was president of the Wilderness Society, so he had a national platform, conservation platform, and he was fighting battles all over the country on behalf of that group. So he definitely was opposed to it, but it all kind of just evaporated. Nothing really came of it, and I think it just kind of died out after it was clear the resort owners were opposed to it, and that there just wasn't really any interest in buying land on the south side of Gunflint to expand the road.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I can see in a sense where it's almost like Justine and some of the other resort owners may have thought of the Hoovers, and Helen is, the first of those damn liberals that are up here. They don't feed, they don't hunt, they don't want power, they want to save the trees and all that, where that might have not vibed so much. And there's still some of that dynamic at play up the Gunflint.
Oh, absolutely. I would, Helen was probably, in those days they weren't environmentalists as much as they were conservationists, and that's what people. And Helen was really of that school because she also was quite active in opposing the spraying of DDT on the county roads up there to keep the grasses down on the side of the road. And she made a very strong case, and it went all the way to the State Department of Conservation and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. And she pointed out to them that you're spraying on all these hills above the south side of Gunflint Lake, and it's leaching into the lake, and every one of the people on the lake at that time was drawing their water out of the lake.
Yeah.
A few had wells, but most of the people were just drawing it out because it was so clear. And once she pointed that out, they stopped spraying that next year for budworms with DDT because there wasn't any budget for it.
Yeah, as opposed to just a straight up acknowledgement of, all right, we understand your point.
Yeah.
So when we talk about Sig Olson and Helen's correspondence, I mean, would it be an exaggeration to say they were friendly or friends, or more just correspondence and sort of respect in that way of being authors?
Mostly because they were authors. It was interesting. Helen's first book was published by a different publisher than her other three. And she had written a lot of magazine articles in Audubon and conservation magazines, and that's how she got a book contract to do the first book. And then Alfred Knopf, a well-known publisher in New York who was publishing Sigurd Olson, wrote her a letter saying, I read this article you did in the Living Wilderness magazine, and he said, would you and your husband be interested in doing a book for us? And she went, my book was just published by this other publisher, and maybe someday we'll get together. Well, she had such a bad experience with that first publisher that she ended up writing to Alfred Knopf saying that she wanted her book, The Gift of the Deer, which was about the deer family that they fed on their property, and they ended up publishing it. It was a huge, immediate bestseller. Got condensed by Reader's Digest books, and that sold like 1 million copies.
That's right.
So she really, so they knew each other through Knopf, their publisher. And then these things that they sort of kept in touch with each other about conservation issues like the border. And then she also, they just exchanged letters that were just sort of, I've been working on my new book and it comes out in the fall. I understand you're working on something. Tell me more. And a little bit of that back and forth.
Yeah.
Both of them were so busy writing. And Sig was busy with lots of national conservation things that was running in Reagan, and they both were interrupted by fans. I mean, fans would go to Ely and just drop in at Sig on his house.
Yeah.
And the same thing happened to Helen once The Gift of the Deer came out. I mean, people just went up the trail and they just asked anybody, any of the resorts, where do the Hoovers live? Oh, they're down there, and they would just show up. And they wouldn't make an appointment. They wouldn't send a card. They couldn't call because they had a party line. But Helen was trying to write, and she just couldn't. She just couldn't bear all the interruptions, and it got to be crazy. It's what drove them away.
Right, and they ended up going to the southwest, New Mexico, and in that area.
Yeah, they first traveled through there on their first vacation in 1967 after she made some money from The Gift of the Deer, because Abe, her husband, went down to the Ford dealer here in Grand Marais and bought himself a Mustang. So they had this little maroon Mustang that they tooled around out west, and eventually, I think Helen eventually wanted to write about nature in other parts of the country and kind of immerse herself like she did here, and she really wanted to do it at the new national park in Utah, and that became a national park in 1964, Bryce Canyon and all that area. And she was hoping that with a little bit of her celebrity that she might be able to get the Department of Interior to let her camp out maybe for 6 months or 8 months, and they said it doesn't work that way. So they were like, So that idea was thwarted. When they settled in New Mexico, she thought that might be the thing. The problem with New Mexico is the seasons don't change much, and she found that there just wasn't that much stuff that was of interest like there was living up on the Gunflint.
Yeah. So they were here like in the late 40s, 50s, in that time frame. I mean, in summary of their experience, would you say that they liked it? Did they enjoy their time up the trail? How did they feel about just the Boundary Waters region?
Well, I think they enjoyed it very much. When they bought the cabin, they knew the area was going to get developed because her husband had said, we ought to get this while we can because it's not going to last. And they had their really difficult years, the first few years, because they really didn't know what they were doing. They didn't have much money. Abe was doing artwork, and they were selling stationery to make money, and then the books and the magazine articles contributed to that. So in the early years, they really loved it because it was quiet and they could just enjoy it. But then as the money came and the fame came, and then at the same parallel, all the other development that was going on the Gunflint Trail, the whole dream was lost for them, and I think she just felt like it's never going to be the same. I'm just going to move away because I just can't bear it.
Okay. Well, as we look around here, I mean, bustling scene, tourists and maybe some local people aplenty, and it's, I had watch someone trying to parallel park there that's entertainment. We should have had the camera on that. But this is now a much different place than it was even 15, 20 years ago, and there's some local lamenting about that, these changes that you were just talking about, that Helen's experience. What's your read on this whole vibe down here?
Well, it's very busy today, and obviously it's an October Saturday, so it will be. But it is another sort of step toward further sort of exposure and development, and I can see where some of the folks who maybe have been here since the 70s don't like the changes, but then, you know, people like the Hoovers in the 50s didn't like the changes that the folks who were complaining in the 70s were the ones making the change then.
Right.
So every generation sort of adds to the development and all that. What I do hope people take away, and I think they do when they come here, is that they get out into the trails and into the backcountry and enjoy that and get some peace and quiet and enjoy nature.
Right, exactly. I was out just this morning, as a matter of fact, not long before we met, and fishing for some splake, which is a type of a trout species, and had the lake to myself, and it was a beautiful morning, 31 degrees out when I put the canoe on, caught my limit of trout in about an hour, and, you know, like I say, the lake to myself. So there's still plenty of good pockets up here in the Boundary Waters region.
Absolutely. It's gorgeous.
Yeah. Well, the book's called Her Place in the Woods. We're speaking with the author, David, and he's been up here a couple times now to Cook County, at least this summer, a few times that I know of. And like I say, we'll have this link here to the Chick Walk discussion, which is over an hour long and was really informative. And there's some good Q&A at the end, too, so make sure you watch all the way through on that. And thanks to Chick Walk for filming all those author presentations, or just presentations that they do throughout the summer and fall. And this one going on today up at the Arrowhead Center for the Arts as well. David, really a pleasure to meet you and talk with you. I appreciate your time. This was really nice.
You as well. I'm excited that you were interested in talking to me about the book.